I'm just honored to be here to learn from the likes of Dr. Tautges and others. And I'd like to start by introducing the three organizations that are present and presenting this. The first of which is Michael Field's Ag Institute. Michael Field's Agricultural Institute is a nonprofit dedicated to supporting sustainable agriculture, located in East Troy, Wisconsin, but supporting initiatives throughout the upper Midwest. We're lucky to have no shortage of Michael Field's colleagues here, including Noemi, Christine, Esther, and Nicole. I hope I'm not forgetting anybody else. But they're wonderful collaborators with UW Extension. Um, AUA. I don't know if Advocates for Urban Agriculture wants to do a little self-introduction, but I'm certainly happy to share. Vale, yeah?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you, everyone from the Chicagoland area or the Great Lakes in general. We're really excited to be part of this webinar. There's so many amazing growers that I've been able to partner with throughout the last 2 years. And it's a great honor and privilege to be here with the Michael Fields Institute and the University Extension of Wisconsin. Um, and also the presenter today. Thank you so much for your time and the effort that you put into this collaboration. And we're excited to learn more about soil health. And yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Well, because my tech issues burnt up a good bit of our earlier time, I don't want to waste too much more time. Thank you so much, Vale, for that introduction of AUA. Many of you know AUA as a powerhouse organization serving growers in the Chicagoland area, helping advance water access and soil health initiatives, food safety, and much more. Their online resources are really magnificent. If you haven't had a chance to check them out and you're interested in urban ag, you really got to spend some time looking at AUA's web presence. It's really neat. Um, I want to introduce our first presenter. However, this is Dr. Nicole Tautges. I have known Nicole for now 4 or 5 years. She is an agronomist by training and seems to live and breathe soil and nutrient management and cropping systems. Every conversation I have with this person, I learn something, and she's fearless. When there's a question that she doesn't know the answer to, she doesn't do any hand waving. She says, I don't know that, but then she finds the answer. This has happened in many conversations with Nicole. And she's also fearless in the respect that she has jumped into the conversation on urban agriculture with a deep curiosity and interest in helping growers who are working in these systems, particularly on soil health and the production of staple crops, small grains, and maize. So I don't want to, I couldn't possibly overhype Nicole's uh, amazing contribution, but I will say that we're really lucky to have her. And with that, I'll cede the floor to Dr. Tautges for some background on soil health and why it matters.
Well, gosh, thanks, Martin. Hopefully this isn't a turd of a presentation now. Um, we're gonna jump right in and share. We're gonna get going. How much time do I have? I have like 20 minutes, right? All right. So it was nice to see you all. Oh boy, I hope I'm able to see the chat while I am presenting. Let me figure that out because I want to see. Okay, I want to make sure I can see the chat. Okay, soil. I would like to hear from you all what you think soil is. I don't really mean the abstract, I mean in the concrete. Like, what is soil made of? What composes soil? What is its basic element? And drop it in the chat, please, your answers. Nutrients. Oh, yeah. Let's see. How do I do that, Chris? I gotta get out of. Yeah, thank you. Oh no, I don't think I can do it presenting, Chris, because I gotta draw.
Nicole, how about I bark out some of the answers here that we're seeing
Yeah,
in the chat?
yeah. We're not gonna do.
One,
Okay, we're getting, yeah, nutrients. Sorry, I got confused. Decomposed plant, animal matter, poop, rocks, sand. Excellent. Yep, microbes. Here we go. Uh-oh, somebody took soil science. Sand, silt, clay, organic matter. Very good. Very good. Yes, dirt. Thank you, Joan. The last.
MINRALS, min, earth, oh.
All right. Very good. I think you guys got it pretty well. Soil is essentially little tiny
and
rocks.
organic matter.
Yep, good. Soil is essentially made up of little tiny rocks.
Silt.
Oh, sorry. All right, we're gonna keep this to the chat just because there are so many of us. I'm sorry. I would so love to hear everybody's voices, but we're gonna do this in person someday. So, soil is essentially made up of little tiny rocks. When the earth was young, there was just rock everywhere. And over time, all of the forces of weather, wind, water, they broke that rock down into smaller and smaller pieces. And eventually, it started turning to very small pieces or dust, and dust comparatively. And that's how you get soil. Now, what happened in the beginning, let's see. In the beginning, so we have these rocks. I'm going to actually transition to, I want to draw. So in the beginning, we have sort of these particles, right? We've just got little tiny rocks of various sizes everywhere on top. This has been broken down. This is completely inorganic, right? So there's no life. And then all of a sudden, there's microbes in here. So there's magically life starting to happen. In here, these little tiny microbes. Okay. And then they start to be able to use the rocks. But then some of these, for these to live, there's no food in here, right? Nothing can eat just rocks. We're carbon-based life forms. So what these were, the first microbes were photosynthetic. They were autotrophic. They were making their own food from sunlight. And then eventually you get plants growing, right? And these guys are autotrophic. They're making their own food from sunlight. And then what happens is the very magic that everyone was talking about in the chat, that thing called organic matter. So you got all these rocks, and then you start to get pieces of organic matter. They're from the microbes. They're many different sizes. They're from the plant matter. It's like this. And then you start to get complexity in here. And then other microbes start coming. And then these guys are not autotrophic. Is this? Oh, this is annoying. Let's see. And then you start having these guys that are not, that are eating other things. So they're eating carbon. So you get increasing complexity, right? So where I'm going with this is that you've got rocks, as someone said, please go away. There are 3 different kinds. Somebody said it. So we have sand. We've all heard of sandy soil, and this is the largest particle type. All soils are divided and classified into sort of different relative proportions of these. So this is sand, and that's a big one. That's the biggest particle size. Sand, and then silt is kind of medium. And then clay is teeny tiny. Small is clay. Soils are a mix of these, all of our soils. And they are a mix of these because of the historical geographic occurrences or forces that happened in a particular locality over time. So all soils, and you can look this up on something called the Web Soil Survey, you can find out what type you could put in your own GPS coordinates, and you can find out what type of soils yours is. And I thought about bringing it up, but I don't want to get that technical, but there's something called the soil triangle. Is it sand, silt, clay? And then you can measure the percentages, and then you got to trace in here, and then it gets wacky really fast. So we're not going to dig deep on that one. You can look up on something called Web Soil Survey, and you can look up your soil classification. And these will be something, it kind of depends on what these are. You can have, the most common that we have in the Midwest is a silt loam. And these are highly productive soils that are black. What I forgot to say is that all of this organic matter is what turns soil black, dark, right? Compost is like black. So as you get more organic matter in your soil, it'll turn blacker. Silt loams are dark. You'll get clay loams. You'll get sandy loams. You can get sandy clays. You can get clays. There's all sorts of different kinds. And the type of soil that you have is kind of probably the most important information that you can have to start with, because it influences, it's called soil texture is what this ends up. So soil texture is the amount of sand, silt, and clay in relative percentages, adding up to 100%, that is in your soil. And that type of soil influence, or the texture, is what influences everything. So let's see if I can erase everything here. All right. We're going to start over. Okay. And then, feel free to drop questions in the chat all the time. When I give this in person, I like to do it really interactive. So feel free to lead me. But what we should know, I think a lot of us are growers and gardeners. So what we should know is that your nutrient availability is going to be, and sort of the biological activity of your soil is going to be highly influenced by your soil texture. So when we have, and sort of the way you interact with the soil is going to be influenced a lot by the texture. When we have a sandy soil, got these big particles in here, relatively big, right? That means we have big pore spaces, big air in here. Now that's good because roots can explore all of this space. What color does this give me? Okay, good. There's a lot of space for roots to explore. There's also a lot of space for water to go through. And so in sands, that's why we grow our root crops, because they don't run into a lot of obstruction. It's easy for them to grow big. I think a lot of us know this intuitively. The problem is that sands lose a lot of water. Then they also lose a lot of nutrients too. So you'll have nitrogen is our most important macronutrient. So you have nitrogen in two forms in the soil. One is positively charged, NH4 plus. This is ammonium. And then you have nitrate. This is negatively charged like this. So nitrate is water soluble. because it has a negative charge. And so why isn't a positively charged thing water soluble? Because water is polar. So the other thing we should know about organic matter, so it's really jagged edges, and the edges of organic matter are positively charged. Sorry, you didn't know you would be learning chemistry tonight. Oh, I'm sorry. I got this backwards. Erase that from your notes. The edges of organic matter are negatively charged. That's just the way plant matter works. They're negatively charged. So they will grab on to cations like NH4, like potassium, which is another plant macronutrient, like calcium, magnesium. These will stick onto organic matter. That's another really good organic matter. That's another good feature of organic matter is it's going to retain more of these nutrients like potassium, calcium, nitrate in the form of ammonia. But then it'll also repel negatively charged molecules like nitrate. So then this goes down. This goes in water. This is highly soluble in water, so this will go down. So in sandy soils, we have a really hard time holding on to nitrogen, which means that you find yourself having to apply it all the time, and that gets problematic in terms of conservation and dollars that you spend on that. So what do we do to improve a clay soil? I hope this is a good color.
Hey, Nicole, can I jump in just a second? Say,
Please do. Please
as
do.
a housekeeping point of order, you are very generous with your receptiveness to questions, interjecting. If folks don't want to just butt in like I'm doing, you can post your questions in the chat. Esther is compiling them in a Google Doc, and in about 15 minutes, we'll open up the floor to the questions from the group. So there will be a Q&A opportunity after Nicole's done with her spiel. Just wanted to clear the air.
Okay, cool. If that's how you want to do it, bueno. So, all right. I'm trying to make this like germane to gardeners here. So we're losing nitrate. How do you improve the texture of a sand? Or how do you improve kind of the ability to retain nutrients, the ability to retain water? You add organic matter. Because then what happens? Oops, sorry. So then what happens? I'm going to recreate this soil here. When you get organic matter, and the edges of organic matter are sticky. So what you get is you get more filling of your pore spaces. And you also get these little sticky glue-like particles in your soil that help stick these sand particles together. And that way, these will kind of help with water retention. Because look at this, you'll get water trapped in. This is kind of a closed pore. You get water trapped in here. Once you get water trapped, you also get nutrients trapped. So you want to add organic matter to a sandy soil, and that's why, because you kind of stick all your particles together and you glue it together. Yeah, Tim, I'll come back to that in a second. How do you add organic matter? It sounds like from the chat, a lot of you have intuition around this. You can add manure. You can add compost. A lot of manure is best when it's composted. A lot of those manures and compost, manures typically have more nitrogen than what just a plant-based compost will have. So you're introducing organic matter and nutrients by those. And it takes some time. It takes repeated applications every year of manure and compost, but over time you will increase your amount of organic matter that's gluing these soil particles together. Okay, so then what happens with a clay? You just get a new I thought I had turned that one dark, but I haven't. Okay. Bear with me for a second. Okay. So then with a clay, and loam's kind of in the middle, so I'm not going to go into that. I'm just going to do the two extremes. With the clay, you have all these little tiny, there's so many, they're packed in here. They're so tiny. Each little clay particle has a crystalline structure itself with all sorts of its own funky chemistry going on. There's all sorts of different clay crystal structures that you can look up. Okay. So what do we notice here? There's very little pore space, right? These little tiny balls are all stuck together. There's very little aeration here. That's why these waterlog. They tend to retain nutrients better. They also, because they're teeny tiny, and I didn't get into this with the sand, these can get compacted a lot more easily because, let's see, compaction. If we're familiar with compaction, we've got downward pressure created by feet, hooves, or tillage, cold hard steel. So sands, when you think about a sand, there's a lot of room in a sandy soil to displace these. So if you're pushing down on this, these just kind of move. There's a lot of air for them to move. They can shift laterally. And they're a lot more tolerant to compaction. But what happens with clays and loams is that when you have compaction here, and we need to think about this with tillage, this is a big problem in gardening because a lot of people are rototilling every year. It's actually, you feel like you're mixing the soil, but on the aggregate, in net, there's a downward pressure. And there's not a lot of place for these. These are kind of shifting and you're packing them more tightly together. Think about like squeezing the water out of cheese. And so you're squeezing these together and it's getting denser. So then your soil density goes up, and that's really bad, and it's really challenging over the long term because eventually your plant roots just cannot get through. They get stuck. Then you get stunted plants. So we got to think about that and remember with repeated tillage, particularly in clays and loams. Now, the other thing with clays is that they have these really active edges. And they have a lot, like chemically, there's just a lot of bonding that goes on here. So then what you have is you have a lot of organic matter. There's a lot of complexity in these soils, and it leads to a lot of sort of microbial diversity there. And so these things clays tend to hold on very well to our ammonium, our potassium, and our calcium, kind of depending on the chemical charges of your clay. So nutrient management in these typically isn't as challenging as in other soils. Most of the challenges in managing that texture, that workability. And you'll get these big chunks. We've all had this, right? Big, they'll kind of break in like a diamond or a square, these big clods. And again, the way to interrupt that, the same as a sand, is to introduce organic matter. Because you have all these little particles that are really sticky to each other because of ionic bonds, chemical bonds. When you get organic matter in there, it just starts to interrupt all the stickiness. It's kind of like little springs that also increase the soil's resistance to compaction. So what you're doing, you can add compost or manure, same thing. You can also start growing things whose roots will start to get in. Sorry, I'm going to keep drawing this clay. We're going to zoom in. You can start to introduce plants that have these really fibrous root systems like grasses. And these are really good at exploring and winding their way through. And then the good thing about plant roots, like you'll get from cover crops, especially ones that go deep, is they start depositing organic matter at different layers of the soil. And they'll even do it down deep because roots will senesce and die. They're sloughing. It's kind of like our skin cells. They're always sloughing organic matter. And so they're introducing that when you have deep roots, they're sloughing organic matter deeper into your soil profile, and they're helping just improve the soil texture throughout. So I encourage you to plant cover crop grasses, things like oats can be planted in the spring prior. Oats are only a spring cover crop. Well, you can plant them in the fall after you harvest, and then they are not frost hardy, so they will winter kill, which is good because then you don't have to deal with them in the spring. So oats can be an option for planting in the fall after you're done. They germinate quite quickly.
Right.
You can broadcast them and just rake over the top. Rake soil lightly. You can kind of rake them in. They don't have to be completely covered. They germinate quite well. Another recommendation that I have is clovers, but these are perennial. So clovers are leguminous. They do quite well in our area of the country. So things like red, white clover, the seed for those is pretty ubiquitous. These are introducing nitrogen into the soil, and so those are going to be adding a nitrogen, but they also have pretty good root systems that are going to benefit soil structure. Clovers are perennial, so you're going to have to deal with them over time. But sometimes what I do, or what a lot of clover cover croppers do, is they'll sort of strip till, or they'll just take out certain sections. Again, I don't have too much time, so we're kind of jumping ahead from very rudimentary like fundamentals to the end point of application. And I know that our next webinar is going to go into this a little bit more, but we're talking about sort of soil management, what we can do to improve it. Oats, this is going to give you some nitrogen. A really productive stand of red clover can get you over 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre, which is a ton. That's for if you spend some time cover cropping, like if you take your garden out for a year and just mulch with clover, keep mowing it. So you can introduce quite a lot of N, and then you won't need to worry about adding additional fertilizer. These are some of the most common ones. What you'll see driving around right now that's getting terminated is rye. So winter rye. Rye is very winter hardy. You only plant it in the fall and then you terminate it ahead of spring. And it's really good and beneficial for soil structure. How are we doing with berseem clover? Should we jump to questions now or should I keep going?
Nicole, you should keep going up to 6:45. You have another 10 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good. Then I have time to go into microbes. Let's go into microbes. I'm getting distracted by these questions, but we'll come back to them, right? Or should we pause for Q&A now?
You can go ahead and finish your presentation. I'm putting them all together, and then Martin will read out to you, and then you can respond.
Okay. Okay, great. These are really good questions, so I'm excited for that part. Okay. I love participatory webinars, so I have or presentation, so I'm having a hard time here. What do you think about, I'd love to see, what do you all think about when you think about soil microbes? Can you drop some things in the thoughts in the chat? Nutrient cycling, good. Martin, come on. I actually have a slide about that. Nutrient cycling, respiration. Okay. I might click.
Nicole, I have a question. They're being marketed as another input, microbes. What does that mean for us as farmers?
Right there.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a really complex question. I'll come back to that. Comes with nitrogen. What are the best practices in foliage and mulch? Yeah, you want them. Okay, very good. All right. So I'll skip ahead and I'll actually use my slides here. So we're thinking, I talked a lot about soil organic matter being good. I'm gonna thank you for these thoughts, and we're gonna touch on all of these, what people are dropping in there. So I talked a lot about soil organic matter and it being good. These are the practices that we know build organic matter. So this is no-till, which is more of a concept that's important to bulk acreage, but I think as vegetable growers, it's more useful to think about reduced tillage, or even, and that when I say reduced tillage, I mean reduced in terms of the number of times that you till per year. So frequency, and that probably seems the most obvious, but we're also talking about depth and then also mixing. So inversion tillage is the most disruptive. That's what moldboard plows do. That's how they turned over and terminated the prairies in North America to start the massive agriculture industrial structure we now have today. But there's also kind of vertical tillage that mixes soil vertically. So something like a disc, a more intensive disc will do this. And then there's also lateral soil tillage that tends to just mix it horizontally. And a lot of tillage tools do both lateral and vertical mixing, so they'll be kind of angled, but they won't completely flip it over like you would do with a shovel. So you want to think about limiting the depth of your tillage and also limiting the amount of mixing that you do. You kind of want to minimize the amount of disturbance. And again, with vegetables, there's a lot of no-till vegetable work going on, and I think that it's really difficult because a lot of our vegetable varieties weren't bred for no-till conditions. So they're very used to tilthy, loose, rototilled soil. And that's not to say that you shouldn't try it. You certainly can. But I know that I heard a grower a couple weeks ago talk about how they had gone all the way to no-till and then kind of settled in the middle at being happy with a reduced tillage regime. So you can think about rototillers are very, very disruptive. They're doing pulverization of your soil structure. I'm going to go back quick and talk about aggregates. So something called soil aggregates, AGG. You can get your soil tested for this, but it's not super common. Aggregates introduce structural diversity in your soil. So what these are, and what I drew before was overly simplistic. So a lot of soils, you'll have a big diversity of particle sizes. This, a really big one, bunch of really small ones. And again, sort of the relative mix of all those different particle sizes is what determines your soil structure. But what happens even within this, and like we're going in with our little pieces of organic matter, they're all mixed in, it's getting complex. Then even kind of if we zoom in on this, we end up with these things called soil aggregates. And they kind of look like this. I should have drawn this bigger. We're going to just zoom in. Picture us zooming in. There are different kinds of aggregates that scientists have made classifications of. There's large macro aggregates, there's small macro aggregates, and then there's micro aggregates. But what happens is in the middle here, you create a microenvironment. It's a microcosm. Even within, there are all these little microenvironments, microcosms within your soil. It's amazing to think about. Then when you are in here, you get soil microbes that occupy these little niches inside of this aggregate. And now this soil microbe, because they can't move very far, that microbe might never leave this little tiny part of the aggregate right here. So then you get this sort of community diversity in here, living within the aggregates that are different even from your bulk soil. And so this fosters just a lot of diversity, and a lot of nutrient cycling happens even within these microcosms. And then over time, it will leak out of these from water, and then it'll help feed your plants. And microorganisms are essential. So we've got a few different kinds. And now I'm running out of time, of course. So we've got mycorrhizal fungi. And these are symbiotes that live on the roots of plants. They're recruited by plants via chemical signals in the soil. And what they do is actually they extend your root system. So the plant feeds the mycorrhizal fungi carbon. These things want carbon, so they get plant sugars through the roots. But then they're out exploring the bulk soil. They're taking up especially phosphorus, but also water. And the plant is able to access that as well. So it's a symbiosis. I think that's probably one of the better known microorganisms. Not all plants have mycorrhizae. They all have different mycorrhizae. So that's one really common kind. But just to get into a few others, we have bacteria of different kinds, and these are very small. There are a lot of pathogenic bacteria. There's a lot of beneficial bacteria. These are really bacteria. There's millions of these living, probably billions inside even just one aggregate. And when we think about clover, so bacteria are what? All right, draw a clover quick. Boop. A lot of you probably know the bacteria live in the nodules on the roots. These are the rhizobia, and these are fixing atmospheric nitrogen. So our atmosphere is like 70-something% N2. So these bacteria, and it's very inert. Most biological life forms can't access that, but these rhizobia bacteria can, and they live in these plant nodules. They're taking that up. Okay, so some of us probably have heard this.
Hey, Nicole.
And yeah.
If we can conclude this thought and then transition toward questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So just because I think there's going to be a lot of questions about this, so I want to get it out of the way. So, but what else is really interesting about these is that I think the dominant paradigm is that, oh, great, so there's nitrogen in here, and then it just kind of leaks out of here, and then magically becomes available to another plant. Let's make it a Brussels sprout. This will be fun. So it's magically available to another plant, and then that can take up nitrogen and everything's happy. That's actually overly simplistic, and this is why microbes are important. So what you have to think about or remember is that microbes control virtually everything about nutrient availability in soil. So there's nitrogen here, maybe leaking out. It's taken up immediately by another microbe because they're better at taking this up than plants. So then these guys have nitrogen in their bodies Eventually they die. So sad. But then, and then other microbes eat them. And then some of that nitrogen becomes liberated, and phosphorus, and potassium. So an important point that I always like to make is that almost all of the nutrients you add to a soil, especially when they come in the form of organic matter, pass through microbes first before they become available to your plants. So just to tie this all together, this is why microbes are good, because the more microbes you have, the more they're keeping this in your soil, they're not letting it wash away. And then the more are dying and the more are eating each other, and then they're liberating some of these. So you want to create environments in your soil like this, aggregates that foster microbial growth and productivity.
So Nicole, I have there's a question in the chat that might be a useful segue given some of this rich conversation on importance of microbes within nutrient availability to plants. There's a fascinating question acknowledging that urban water is often more than just water and that it's treated with chemicals, including chlorine and others. I think that may be the locus of Tim's question here. But does urban water damage soil bacteria? Is there a risk that chlorinated water could impair soil bacteria?
Chlorinated, excessive chlorine in soils, because it's sorry, sometimes I just have to write things down. This is chlorine. It will actually start to break down soil structure, and you'll get to some of that really compacted. It's because of what chlorine does to chemical bonds in the soil. It'll make a really compacted, like clay soil. So I don't think that you would get to levels that are toxic to microbes because that would be pretty high. But over time, you could definitely damage your soil structure by excessive chlorine, just because of chemically what it does in soils. So it's probably something to keep an eye on. I guess I wouldn't know if the levels of chlorine are so high in urban systems that it does lead to degradation of soil structure. But what happens in really dry areas of the country is that you'll get where water is scarce, it tends to be higher in sodium and chloride, so the salts, because of the salts, and they're just not diluted enough because water is scarce. So in more desert-like arid areas, they have to grapple with this problem. I'd venture to say that the concentration in urban systems is high enough to cause this problem, but I don't actually know. That's a very good question.
That's super interesting. We have another question in the chat, which I think is also somewhat relevant. This comes from Noemi, and she's interested in knowing, you mentioned lateral tillage as an option, like the use of a power harrow or another kind of harrow. Is that a less damaging form of tillage if we are in a system where we must use tillage?
I think that's a really, really good question. I think that in general, from my experience, I guess I don't know exactly by theory, in general, lateral tillage is less damaging than anything that's gonna, so you have kind of different layers of soil as you go down. Anything that kind of flips this and mixes it like this, that's what's really bad. When you're just kind of mixing this way, that's not as bad, but I think the point of my sharing about the aggregates is any tillage you do, you want to bust up these aggregates to the least degree possible. And that's kind of, it's very, you won't know when you're doing it, but you will know over time because you'll just start to get, your soil will not be crumbly. As you start to get more of these macro aggregates, that kind of soil structure is what, that kind of structure in soil is what makes it tilthy and crumbly, which is what we all desire. And I didn't quite get to it, but organic matter helps. Well, I think I did. It helps form these aggregates because it's sticky. So you just need to notice over time, it's experiential a bit, what kind of tillage and mechanical soil management practices, like what those do to kind of the crumbliness or the structure of your soil. A way that you can look at this is pretty simple. You can take a screen, like a piece of window screen. You can put it over a mason jar. You can just kind of press it down, curl it over the top, and you can take some soil, a little handful of soil, and then you fill your mason jar with water almost to the top. You drop your soil in there. This is called the slake test. There's probably a million YouTube videos about it. The aggregates are more resistant to water degradation, so they'll sit on top of that screen and they won't fall apart when subjected to water. Particles of soil that aren't aggregated will wash through the screen and they'll settle in the bottom of your jar. So you can kind of do this at home. The more, and then you can see once it's dropped in water, you'll start to see the little aggregates or kind of groupings of aggregates because you'll get a little chunk. It's really neat to do. I encourage you all to do it sometime. And so you can
Nicole,
kind of keep testing that over time and compare different soils.
I'm so sorry. There's so much nuance that all of these questions really require, but I wanted to open things up to invite folks to ask their own questions. There's been a lot of really good questions in the chat, and if folks have burning questions, now's the time. Come on.
Do you want to read through those questions one by one so she can answer?
I would love to. Yeah,
Yeah.
That's an easy way to do this.
Yeah, that's why it's there. That. Do you have the link?
I sure do. So we had a great question.
Just also B raise their hand. So
great. B, after you.
Yeah, my name is B. They them pronouns. Wanted to ask about cover crops, specifically when it comes to using nitrogen fixing plants as cover crops. Because I know sometimes I've heard that certain nitrogen fixing plants, for example, beans, you don't, in order to benefit from the rhizobia that's being created or something like that, you don't allow it to go to flower or something like that. Like you cut it at a certain point in their lifetime. Not sure. So I guess I'm trying to figure out like what's the best practice or progression when you want to use like nitrogen fixing plants as cover crops so that you can use it as foliage, but also as like the benefits of what's happening under the soil with the rhizobia.
Yeah, what a fantastic question. Yes. Yes, that's correct. So you'll want to in general, the amount of nitrogen is maximized at flower. And actually there's a pretty strong relationship between the amount of biomass, so just plant size and weight. It's directly related to the amount of nitrogen that it contains and has fixed. So generally, if you're maximizing plant biomass, you're also maximizing the amount of nitrogen that you can get from that legume cover crop. And for legumes, the biomass is maximized at early flowering. And that's why you would want to terminate it. So you would kind of mow and then maybe do light tillage to incorporate that. Another thing that I might add is that there are times certainly when tillage is a little bit beneficial as long as it's kept light, and that's one of these times because let's just say you said bean. So because the bean tissue contains a lot of nitrogen. What happens is a lot of that plant nitrogen is in the form of ammonium. When you cut that and chop it all up so that it can get into your soil, actually, not insignificant amount of that nitrogen is going to off gas. So it's going to volatilize and you're going to lose it. Studies have shown that when you incorporate that legume biomass or that enriched biomass, this is true for manure too. Manure should be covered. When you incorporate that or cover it up lightly with soil, you're retaining more of your nitrogen, both in the moment and over time. So think about light tillage being important for incorporating your cover crops and your manure in general.
So Nicole, a question from earlier in the chat, which is in this document I'm reading from, is about the classification of urban soils. Urban soils are often disturbed and bear the hallmarks of human activity. Is there a way to classify them that's different?
I think that it's like more complex than what we probably can get into here, but I think that there's maybe a new term, Martin, called like anthroposols.
That's the answer I would have given too. I found that there's this whole category of so-called anthrosols, which it's not a new idea that human beings are influencing soils with, their coal ash from the Industrial Revolution and their middens from early, from indigenous presence all around the world, and that those are very distinctive soils. Necrosols are where people have been buried. And so in a lot of urban settings, we do have some subset of anthrosols which bear the elements of human habitation. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Esther points out a whole period called the Anthropocene.
Anthropocene. But yeah. I think though, that was really academic. The two most common problems are you're growing in subsoil because there's been a lot of soil disturbance. And then, so topsoil, right? That's the soil where all of the plants have grown for millions of years. And so they've had millions of years to accumulate organic matter, microbes, richness, blah, blah, blah. But when soils are really disturbed from building or whatever, or it was all contaminated and they had to scrape all the contaminated layer off, then a lot of people are trying to grow in subsoil, which has like no organic matter or microbes that have kind of primed it for growing because you're behind a million years, many millions of years. It's a challenge. Again, what can you do? You're just inoculating that soil with a lot of compost, manure, different types of organic matter, straw. You're going to want to mix that in a lot. You're going to need a lot of it. Over time, you're putting on so much of the organic matter. You're inoculating it with microbes, and then the whole system kind of starts to churn. I think the other probably common problem is just like metal contaminated soil. And I don't know that much about that, but you basically shouldn't grow in it. And you're going to need to import topsoil.
And I
Martin
think
knows
that
more about that.
we sort of specifically chose to sidestep that topic in this presentation, not because it's not critically important, but because it needs to be dealt with through people who have the specific expertise to give good guidance on that. And I don't think that we're strictly in this room, although I know that Vale is somebody who has done a lot of thinking about this, and I would recommend reaching out to AUA with especially Chicagoland area specific questions on those things. I'm really sorry. I think we could talk about this set of topics for another hour at least. We do have that coming up, but for the time being, I think this is where the party breaks up. So I'm wondering if there are any closing remarks from any of the co-presenters, Nicole or Esther or Vale.
Thank you so much for the breakdown in how soils are mineralized and biologically decompose over time, and the difference in subsoils and raised bed systems. Often we critically think about how we can build our raised bed systems. So we will keep in mind the inoculants, the manure, and the composting, and other methods that we use locally. But this was a great breakdown of what's happening chemically in our soils. This is something that we do touch upon in some of our soil health workshops and educational training. So a lot of our AUA participants are familiar with soil texture, the soil triangle, and making their own soil assessments so that long term they're able to manage and track their own nutrient cycling. So this was very informational, and we are grateful to be part of this conversation and look forward to our next webinar.
Speaking of which, that webinar is coming up on the 14th. Esther, you were about to jump in and share with us when that was going to be.
Yeah, that was the same. Christine has put that in the chat probably. Please go ahead and register for the next part of the same series.
And with that, I think we may be concluding this evening. World record for an extension affiliated webinar, only 3 minutes over time. Thank you all so much for your time and attention this evening. If there are any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to the presenters. I think the information is contains contact information. If not, we're pretty findable. So please reach out.
Please email me. I'm very happy to email with you about your question and/or set up a phone call.
She'll
We'll
come out
love
to
to
your farm.
engage more. I'll come out to your farm. Yes.
Thank you all, and have a wonderful evening.